There is a specific kind of silence that makes dangerous people nervous. Not the silence of someone who has nothing to say. Not the silence of someone who is hurt and hiding. This is a colder silence. A deliberate one. The kind that sits in a room like a closed door. And the people who once controlled you will do almost anything to pry it back open. Because your silence means they have lost something they never valued until it was gone. They valued your access, your explanations, your need to be understood. And the moment you stop offering these things freely, something in them starts to panic, quietly, behind their eyes, even as their mouth keeps smiling. Most people spend their entire lives negotiating for approval they were never going to receive. They over-explain a decision to a parent who has already decided to be disappointed. They defend a choice to a friend who has already decided to be unimpressed. They chase closure from a person who benefits deeply from never giving it. This is not weakness in the way people assume. It is a trained reflex, built since childhood, that equates silence with abandonment and explanation with safety. But the people who eventually become impossible to manipulate are the ones who unlearn this reflex on purpose, deliberately, coldly, until their calm becomes a weapon nobody saw being sharpened. Picture the moment it usually begins. Someone says something cruel, disguised as concern. A backhanded comment about your appearance, your choices, your pace in life. The old version of you would have flinched, would have rushed to defend, to prove, to correct the record. But something shifts the day you simply look at them, say nothing, and let the sentence die in the air between you. You do not confirm it. You do not deny it. You do not give it the oxygen of your reaction. And in that silence, something remarkable happens. The other person becomes visibly uncomfortable. Because they were expecting a performance, and you did not perform. This is where real power begins. Quietly, without a single raised voice. If you have ever felt that shift happening inside you, that refusal to explain yourself to people who never intended to understand you, say it now in the comments. My silence is not weakness, it is a decision. There is a reason cold discipline unsettles people more than anger ever could. Anger is familiar. Anger can be managed, mocked, provoked further, twisted into evidence that you are unstable, dramatic, too sensitive. But discipline gives them nothing to work with. There is no outburst to point to, no tears to dismiss, no raised tone to record and replay later as proof of your instability. There is only a person who used to react, who now simply observes, calculates and moves according to their own timeline instead of everyone else's emotional demands. This is precisely why the most dangerous person in any room is rarely the loudest one. It is the one who has stopped needing to be heard in order to feel powerful. Machiavelli understood something about human nature that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. He understood that being loved is fragile, because love depends on the continued goodwill of others. But being respected, even feared slightly, is far more durable, because it does not require anyone's permission to exist. The cold discipline we are describing is not cruelty. It is the refusal to remain emotionally available to people who have shown you repeatedly that they cannot be trusted with that availability. It is choosing consciously to stop feeding a dynamic where your warmth is mistaken for weakness and your patience is mistaken for permission. Consider the people in your life who only respected you once you stopped chasing them. The friend who suddenly became attentive the moment you stopped initiating every conversation. The family member who softened their tone only after you stopped absorbing every insult with a forced smile. This is not a coincidence, and it is not flattering to them. It reveals something uncomfortable but true, that many relationships are built on an imbalance, where one person gives endlessly, and the other person spends endlessly, and the entire structure only survives because one side refuses to stop paying. The moment you stop paying, the structure either collapses, revealing what it truly was, or it rebuilds itself around a version of you that can no longer be taken for granted. This is the part that most people are never taught, and it deserves to be said plainly. Boundaries without consequence are just suggestions. Anyone can say the words, "I will not tolerate this." Very few people can actually enforce silence, distance, and withdrawal when the moment demands it. The cold discipline we are speaking of is not about announcing your limits loudly to the room. It is about quietly living them, so consistently that the people around you eventually learn your limits through your absence, rather than your explanations. You do not need to tell someone you are done. You simply stop being available and let the void speak for itself. If this is resonating with something you have lived through, something you are still healing from, type it now where others can see. My kindness has limits, and I have finally found them. There is a particular kind of grief that comes with this transformation, and it deserves to be acknowledged honestly. Becoming emotionally sovereign means grieving the version of yourself who believed that enough patience, enough love, enough explanation would eventually make someone treat you correctly. It rarely does. People do not change because you were patient enough. They change, if they change at all, when the cost of staying the same becomes higher than the cost of changing. Your silence, your withdrawal, your refusal to keep negotiating for basic respect, these are what raise that cost. Not your anger, not your pleading, your absence. The architecture of this discipline rests on 3 quiet pillars, though you will never announce them out loud. The first is detachment from outcome. The willingness to say what needs to be said, or do what needs to be done, without needing the other person to react in a specific way afterward. The second is emotional economy. The understanding that your reactions are currency, and currency should never be spent on people who have shown you they will not spend responsibly with it. The third is patience without anxiety. The ability to wait, to watch, to let situations reveal themselves fully before you respond, instead of reacting to the first flash of provocation, like a puppet pulling its own strings. Watch how this plays out in a workplace, somewhere most people believe emotional discipline does not belong. And yet it belongs there most of all. A colleague takes credit for your work in a meeting. The untrained reaction is to interrupt, to correct them publicly, to let frustration bleed into your voice in front of everyone. But the disciplined mind does something colder and far more effective. It notes the moment silently. It says nothing in the room. And later in private, in writing, in a manner that cannot be dismissed as emotional, it documents, clarifies, and quietly ensures the record reflects the truth, without ever needing to perform outrage for an audience. This is not passivity. This is precision. Precision almost always outperforms passion in the long run, because passion burns fast, and precision waits for the exact right moment to strike. There is a reason this kind of person becomes almost impossible to gaslight. Gaslighting depends entirely on the target doubting their own perception, rushing to fill the silence with self-blame, over-explaining until the truth becomes muddy enough for the manipulator to reshape it. But a person who has trained themselves in cold discipline does not rush to fill silence. They let the accusation sit there, unanswered, and they watch how the accuser behaves in that silence. Manipulators are deeply uncomfortable with unfilled silence, because their entire method depends on your emotional participation. Remove your participation, and the method collapses on itself, often within seconds. If you have ever caught yourself starting to doubt your own memory because someone else insisted so confidently that you were wrong, write this now plainly, so you remember it later. I trust what I witnessed, even when they insist I did not. This discipline is often mistaken, by people who have never practiced it, for coldness of the heart. It is not. It is the opposite. It is what allows a person to remain deeply loving toward the people who have earned it, precisely because they are no longer bleeding that same warmth into people who exploit it. Think of it as a kind of triage. You cannot save every relationship, every friendship, every family dynamic by giving all of them equal access to your emotional resources. The people who deserve your warmth are the ones who reciprocate it without requiring you to perform for it, negotiate for it, or apologize for having limits around it in the first place. There will be a specific moment, if you commit to this, where someone accuses you of having changed, of becoming cold, distant, different than before. Listen closely to how they phrase it, because it reveals everything. They rarely say you have become dishonest, or cruel, or unfair. They say you have become harder to control. And that sentence, stripped of its disguise, is not an insult. It is confirmation that the discipline is working exactly as intended. The people who benefited most from your old patterns will always be the loudest critics of your new ones, and their discomfort is not evidence that you are doing something wrong. It is evidence that you are finally doing something different. The final layer of this discipline is the hardest to describe, because it lives less in action and more in posture, in the way a person carries themselves through a room where they are being underestimated. It is the quiet decision to let people believe what they want to believe about you, right up until the moment your actions correct the record, decisively, without a single wasted word. Silence, in this sense, is not the absence of a plan. It is the presence of one, unfolding privately, on a timeline you control entirely. If you have made it this far, and something in this has quietly rearranged the way you see your own patience, your own silence, your own limits, leave the words that mark this moment for you. Cold discipline is not who I am becoming. It is who I have decided to protect. There is also a physical dimension to this discipline that almost no one discusses, because it feels too small to mention, and yet it changes everything. Watch the way an undisciplined person enters a room after being wronged. Their shoulders rise. Their breathing shortens. Their eyes search immediately for the person who hurt them, as if their whole nervous system is asking permission to exist comfortably in that space. Now watch the disciplined version of the same person. Their pace does not change. Their breathing stays even. They do not scan the room for approval, because they have already decided, long before walking in, that their presence does not require anyone's validation to be justified. This is not performance. It cannot be faked convincingly, because the body always tells the truth the mouth is trying to hide. Real discipline is regulated first in the nervous system, and only afterward does it show up in the words, or in the silence, that a person chooses to offer the world. This is why so many attempts at emotional detachment fail within days. People try to imitate the outward behavior, the short replies, the flat tone, the refusal to explain, without first doing the internal work of actually regulating the panic underneath it. And manipulative people, the ones who have spent years reading micro-expressions and hesitation, can sense the difference instantly. They can tell when your calm is armor and when it is theater. The theater cracks under pressure. The armor does not, because it was never built to impress anyone in the first place. It was built to protect something. Consider, too, the way this discipline reshapes how a person handles betrayal. Because betrayal is where most people lose themselves completely. The untrained response to betrayal is confrontation soaked in emotion, a desperate need to make the other person feel the full weight of what they did, as if their guilt could somehow be extracted through sheer intensity of reaction. But intensity rarely produces guilt in people who were capable of betraying you in the first place. It usually produces defensiveness, or worse, a strange satisfaction, because your emotional collapse becomes proof, in their mind, that they still hold power over you. The disciplined response is colder and far more devastating in the long run. It is the quiet, total withdrawal of access, without a dramatic final speech, without a public reckoning, without giving them the closure of watching you fall apart in front of them. You simply become unavailable, permanently, and let them sit with a silence they cannot interpret, argue with, or manipulate their way back into. There is a term for this kind of departure, one that Machiavelli himself would have understood instinctively, even if he never used the modern language for it. It is called strategic invisibility. Not disappearing out of fear, but disappearing out of calculation. Because the moment you remove yourself from someone's reach, you remove their ability to study you, predict you, and use that prediction against you. People who cannot locate your reactions cannot plan around them. And people who cannot plan around you eventually lose interest in trying, because the effort required no longer produces a return. It is worth pausing here to acknowledge the discomfort this discipline creates in the people who once relied on your predictability. A parent who could once guarantee your guilt with a single disappointed sigh. A partner who could once end an argument simply by threatening to withdraw affection. A friend who could once talk you out of a boundary by reminding you of everything you owed them. These people built entire strategies around a version of you that no longer exists. And when that version disappears, their strategies collapse with it, often leaving them more exposed and unsettled than you ever were in the relationship. This is not vengeance. You have not attacked them. You have simply stopped being predictable. And in a world built on managing predictable people, unpredictability, wielded calmly, is its own quiet form of sovereignty. Because in the end, the people who fear a person's cold discipline are rarely afraid of what that person might do to them. They are afraid of what that person will no longer allow to be done to them. And that fear, quiet, unspoken, and entirely earned, is the truest form of power there is.